welcome to BNC Live. I'm Tishani Wetlow. Our top story this hour, President Joe Biden and Madam VP Kamala Harris jetting to Georgia to speak to America's promise that all men are created equal when it comes to equal access to the ballot. But that's being questioned. The Biden administration and Democrats are hoping to advance two bills, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act as well. But the reality is that they face an uphill battle to get the measure signed into law. Biden says it's time to make it happen.
This is one of those defining moments. It really is. People are going to be judged. Where were they before and where were they after the vote? History's going to judge it. It's that consequential.
Now, this comes after a slew of new laws in many Republican-led states that many Democrats say are aimed at making it harder to vote. But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says that just isn't the case. All right, well, to find out what the case is, we're bringing in a panel. We're bringing in the big guns to get some more insight on the president's address. We got Barrett Holmes Pitner. He's a political strategist, also author and professor at George Washington University. We also got Todd Belcourt joining us from Chi-Town. He is the co-founder of the national nonprofit Social Change. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. So, Barrett, we'll start with you. As part of this trip, right, the president plans to visit the graves of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But black voter groups are angry, saying, don't speak, right, unless you got a plan. We're tired of all the talk. What do you think? I mean, you're from the Atlanta area. Are you surprised by this critique and response?
Yeah, I'm not fully surprised by it. Granted, once Biden got elected, there's an expectation, a hope that the voting rights bills and the equality that we're pushing for will happen rather quickly. And I understand the frustration for Georgians, especially the amount of push that Stacey Abrams has done to get Georgians to vote, and how much we've been working over the last handful of years to really make sure that the black voice in Georgia is represented at a state level and seeing how that can impact at a national level. So I understand the frustration that people have that what we hope will occur hasn't occurred yet. But I think we just need to make sure that we take perspective and understand that DC sometimes works at a different pace, and that Biden and Kamala Harris are working hard to try to get what they've intended to occur. And so the frustration makes sense, but it's more complex, I guess.
All right, Todd, do you feel the same way? Do you feel the same way as Barrett, that Madam Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden are actually working hard for you?
I think they're working, and I think they're working hard. The question is whether or not they're working effectively. And I think that's where the concern is on the community aspect. I mean, as we engage in the front lines and getting people out to vote and fighting these voter suppression laws, we're not sure if there's enough support in Washington in terms of doing the hand-wringing and really using the bully pulpit. The things are, really within their exclusive authority to make the measures that we know need to be law real. We've been talking about the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act for a long time. We've been talking about the Freedom to Vote Act for a long time. And the bottom line is, if something isn't done soon, it's going to actually have an impact of overturning the possible results for the next election. So I agree with both what the professor's saying, but I also agree with the organizations on the ground. We appreciate people coming out and speaking out. Of course, we need the president to use a bully pulpit. But unless there's a plan that's discussing how to deal with redistricting, how to deal with the assault on voting rights, and how to make sure we're doing something meaningful about the obstruction that's taking place, not just by the Republicans, but within their own Democratic Party, then there isn't much but talk taking place, and that's unacceptable.
All right. Barrett, what's up with this nuclear option? Explain that to me.
Oh, I believe you're referring to fixing the filibuster.
Yes.
And, I think the fact that we call it a nuclear option is problematic because the filibuster has existed just as a problematic enterprise in its entirety. So removing it shouldn't be considered nuclear. That should just be considered smart, where we can't have the notion that some politicians can just stop legislation by talking forever. We know that the filibuster was used prior to the Civil War to prevent freedoms and liberties being extended to African Americans. And it's been used throughout Jim Crow to prevent equality for the Black community. So, the fact that we're calling it the nuclear option means that we're using conservative talking points. What we're talking about is removing an impediment to democracy that has been used to impede the equal expansion of the franchise to all Americans almost since its inception in America. So it's just a smart option. It's a democratic option. There's nothing nuclear about it.
Got it, got it. And we've also seen how Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has abused the filibuster, right? When Obama was in office, doing any and everything he could to kind of block legislation from being passed. Todd, I want to ask you, Biden says he supports changing the filibuster rule, right? But how can he possibly do that if he doesn't have every single member on board? It's so tight. We're talking 50-50 with Harris, VP, Madam VP Harris, casting the final vote.
That's right. I mean, as of right now, he doesn't have the votes. But I slightly disagree. I do think there is a significant risk to dismantling the filibuster, because even in a year's time from now, the composition of Congress will look drastically different. And to know that the simple majority is sufficient to drastically change policy in America is a dangerous concept, even though it's kind of part and parcel of what people already believe. The filibuster has also protected Black people and brown people on significant occasions when folks who represent our interests have been in the minority. So I do think it's something to take and be very careful about and be very surgical and make sure whatever is done is limited to the notion of voting rights, the notion of our fundamental freedoms. But at the end of the day, Biden doesn't have support to do it anyway. So he needs to, when he comes to Atlanta, when he talks at Morehouse and Clark Atlanta and goes to Ebenezer and all these places, he needs to talk about his plan to really address and overcome these very clear obstacles that up to now, it doesn't look like he has a plan to do something about.
All right, well, speaking of the commander-in-chief, let's actually listen to sound where he discusses exactly what you were just talking about, Todd.
This is one of those defining moments. It really is. People are going to be judged. Where were they before and where were they after the vote?
All right, Barrett, where were they? How would they be judged? What will history say about this moment?
Well, I will say America has a very good track record of rewriting history in all sorts of various ways. And so we'll see what people say about this moment 20, 30 years down the road. But what we're really talking about is, will America do what it always says it wants to do? Like, we have a narrative of being a country that really cares about making sure people have access to the vote, and we're a bastion of democracy. But we've always had impediments preventing African Americans from equally accessing those votes. And you can see, due to the growth of the Black voter turnout and the greater influence at state levels and national levels, Republicans have been making it harder for African Americans to vote. And the filibuster historically has been a way that they've used to prevent the expansion of the franchise and equality in many various ways. And so, Biden has a strategy of trying to go the traditional route. We had a majority. Let's see if the majority of Democrats to pass this. Manchin and Sinema are getting in the way. The question for larger works is like the filibuster. Is if we remove it, is it worth the risk? Because this is a moment we're gonna be judged by in history of what we did. How does this impact the future? And so you can see an evolution of the strategy of what Biden's trying to do. It's just, there's so many roadblocks and impediments. And the most important thing is making sure that we continue having the conversation and making sure we know that there's going to be actions that follow. I think Todd brought up a good point about, are those actions effective? But that's a conversation you can have so long as you're continuing to work together and you know that you share the same end goal. And I think that's something that shouldn't be lost. And it's just quite important to make sure we keep on fighting for this, for these freedoms.
All right, Todd, final question to you. Stacey Abrams unable to meet the president and the vice president, citing a scheduling conflict. Or do you think it could be her possibly trying to distance herself, since there hasn't been any meaningful voting rights legislation passed on the federal level as promised?
Stacey Abrams is running for governor in Georgia. The very same people who are responsible for getting Warnock and Ossoff in office are the same people saying, don't come to Atlanta, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, unless you have a plan. She's responding to her constituencies, if I were to speak and I were to guess. But at the same time, of course, she's best situated to speak for why she has a scheduling conflict when the two most important people in the nation are coming to town. But I do think at the end of the day, if organizations on the ground and activists on the ground, like Social Change, like Protect the Vote GA, like Black Voters Matter, are saying, we need to hear a plan and we need to see what you're doing to execute that. She's right to really support those calls by doing whatever she feels is necessary to provide the support to the community organizations around that will end up fighting for her when the time comes.
All right, gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for stopping by. And coming up on BNC Live, the U.S. is breaking records, and it's not good ones. New COVID cases, hospitalizations up. After the break, we're taking a look at what the CDC is now recommending you do to protect yourself, and also